I don't think any MarTech tool could replace a good Google Sheet. Honestly.
You said that with such a straight face.
Brooklyn, have you tweeted that yet?
Probably. I don't remember.
Here's what go-to-market teams are missing. Proof. That's what I think of every morning when I fire up LinkedIn and scroll through boring manifestos and endless lukewarm takes. Opinions are cheap, and proof is gold. I'm Mark Huber, and this is The Proof Point, a show from UserEvidence that helps go-to-market teams find ideas, get frameworks, and swap tactics. Each episode includes an unfiltered discussion with the biggest names in B2B SaaS to help find the proof points that I'm in search of. You'll learn from sales, marketing, and customer success leaders in the trenches, where I ask them, seriously, what actually works for you? One of our guests actually told me this felt like we were having drinks at a bar and talking about work without all the BS. And that pretty much sums it up and why I'm so excited for this new show. Join us every other week for new episodes. Hot takes, always welcome. On today's episode of The Proof Point, we're talking about content POVs, how to come up with one, and most importantly, how to come up with one that your audience actually cares about. First up, he's the founder of Beam Content, a content agency that we work with at UserEvidence, and I was actually one of their first customers, Brooklin Nash. Brooklin is incredibly talented and low-key one of the funniest people that I know in my little work bubble. Next up, we have Jess Cook. She's the head of content at comms at Island. Jess and I actually met for the first time in person a few weeks ago at the Exit 5 Drive event, and we hit it off right away. She's awesome. I learned so much from her in that conversation and in this podcast episode today. And last, but definitely not least, Brendan Hufford. He's the founder of Growth Sprints, and he's somebody who always brings a lot of energy, always brings a great perspective, and just generally one of the more fun people that I've gotten to know. I love any time that I get to hang with Brendan, and this episode on content POVs did not disappoint. Enjoy. All right. So Brendan, why do most B2B marketing teams play it safe with their content POV?
Okay, this is an absolute hill that I'll die on. I think that they're struggling and they're playing it safe in their content POV, especially because of what I call checkbox marketing, right? Like they do their monthly webinar, their weekly podcast, they're doing their SEO. Every blog has to have their, their Yoast Light Green and WordPress, Google Ads, LinkedIn, newsletter. They're checking all these boxes, right? Except for the ones that I think actually matter. And it's frustrating for me because this makes marketers busier than they've ever been, but with way less to show for it, right? We're repurposing content that didn't have a purpose to begin with. We're becoming spreadsheet engineers, trying to just like manifest some sort of connection to revenue for every freaking post we make on LinkedIn. And honestly, I'm starting to see that now, even with all of this work that marketers are doing, like it can't keep up with the pace of AI. So now checkbox marketing is both boring and expensive. But I think the good news is that today, all of us collectively, if Mark does his job, will provide a way out.
That's a lot of pressure. I love checkbox marketing. I got to ask, did that come right away, Brendan? Did that take time? Where did that come from?
It's one of those things where you can only connect the dots looking backwards. It came from a conversation with my friend Ernie when we were at Active Campaign, when I was in-house still, where we got off probably the 27th weekly metrics meeting in a row, and like all the numbers were red again. Everybody kind of saw the writing on the wall, right? Like layoffs are coming 6 months, 12 months. We don't know when, but they're coming. And we were working our faces off, but like the numbers just weren't going up. And we're producing all of this different content. We kept talking about how it wasn't connected to anything else. And I call this spreadsheet like the spreadsheet that made me quit my job, which was literally just like all of these checkboxes that I had to keep checking every single week. And then in another column, I had to explain. I'll give you an example. We were going to start a newsletter. Can you imagine Active Campaign, an email marketing and marketing automation company, no newsletter? Like we're not even dog fooding our own product, right? Or eating our own caviar, whatever. And we're doing all that. And I have to, like my boss at the time was like, I need to know how many free trials you're going to generate, how many customers you're going to get us, and how much website traffic you're going to generate from the newsletter before you can even start thinking about sending it. I was like, I'm literally just making these up. Like, what would these even be based
on? Let me
right?
tell you.
And I think the other thing too, we had a spotlight email that we sent every week that went out to, I think, all of our customers. It was kind of like a newsletter, but not, because it didn't actually help them. It was just us talking about ourselves. But even creating that was 47 crabs in a bucket, just trying to get whatever, they cared about at the top of that newsletter. And then they didn't care anymore, right? Like at one point we had we were so proud of our Salesforce integration and all this crap. And then you look and it's like, 0.5% of our customers integrate with Salesforce. Why is that? Just because that person yelled the loudest for the spotlight email? But we were seeing that happen again and again. And I just was like, all right, like this is the problem. This is my POV that I exist to solve, both in how I work with clients, but also in my content.
I got one question that is not in the episode outline at all, which is great because you have no idea what I'm going to ask. The last time that I saw you was in a gift shop in the Vermont airport, and you were buying gifts for your kids because you forgot to buy gifts while we were at Drive. So the question is, how did they respond to the gifts, and did you pick good ones?
First of all, allegedly. Second of all, the word forgot there is doing a lot of heavy lifting and might be a little inaccurate. The correct phrasing might have been was having a great freaking time hanging out with people and didn't think, where could I go find gifts? Also, Burlington, Vermont, you'd be surprised. Well, if you've been there, you wouldn't be surprised. Isn't super commercial. It's not like there's 500 gift shops to go buy stuff. Like you actually have to look. There's stores and things. But I mean, I crushed it. Like it's awesome. Me and Dimitri, who was there with me, were walking through getting stuff for our kids. And I'm not going to lie. There's a gift shop before security and one after security. And if you wait to go through security and then buy stuff, you've made a terrible mistake. You have to go to the one. But we did great. They were pumped.
Okay, I to make you feel better, I did the same thing. But I went to the gift shop after security and I did okay.
Ooh, okay, good. You're better than
Well, here's why I think it was hilarious is because Brendan and I drove together to the airport, and you're telling me, I hope there's a gift shop. I hope there's a gift shop. And unless you've been to the Burlington airport before, like it's a pretty small airport. So in my head, I'm like, there's no fucking way there's going to be any gift shop here.
No
and
way.
Then, sure enough, the one before security blew my mind how many options there were. And then there was a second one after security that just did well at. So I don't know. That was a happy accident.
Big props to the Burlington airport.
Yeah. It's like the security guy just looks at you when you come in and he's like, are you good? Are you cool? Come on in. It's fine. Like that's the security. It's so silly.
You have a nice face. Come on through.
You have kind eyes.
Yeah.
This is better than the Kenai Airport in Alaska. There's no gift shop. And I once arrived and saw a guy unloading his rifle outside of the airport to pack it and bring it in safely. Like, we're in Alaska now.
Yes. Excellent.
So I don't know how I transitioned from packing rifles to content POVs, but here we are, Jess. How do you define a content POV?
So in my mind, it's an imperative. It either has to have, if you're writing it out, you're trying to get it down on paper, it should probably have the word, and see what I just did here, should or shouldn't or must or mustn't, right? Like if you're trying to understand what your point of view is, it needs to be something that you are telling people that either should or shouldn't do or mustn't do. And it doesn't always have to come in that form. But when you're really trying to figure out what is my brand's point of view, my personal point of view, writing it out in that way really, really helps. Like just this morning, I did a LinkedIn post that was like, why I'm not scared of noise in marketing and why you shouldn't be either, right? Like that's a point of view. Like everyone talks about there's so much noise, you have to try and wade against the current of the noise. And it's like, who cares? If you have good content, it's going to rise to the top, right? So that's a point of view. It has to be some sort of imperative. It has to be some sort of like spiky kind of against the grain thought that gets people like to change their mind about something.
Brendan, how does that stack up with what you think of as a content POV? Because I've learned a lot from you about this particular topic, whether you know that or not.
Yeah, I mean, look, like not everybody has the POV, the signed copy of the POV sitting on their desk. You have to watch the video for that one. I think your POV when it comes to content has to start with, and this is something I saw go awry at ActiveCampaign, especially in tech and especially in SaaS. We want to like name our solution, and then everything becomes about the solution. We write about the product, how the product solves the problem, and the product. And instead of naming a weird ass category, like maybe we should just name the problem that we solve and then say, and this comes from like the Andy Raskin school of marketing, but like you define the problem, the old game, and then you define the new game and you say, we exist to help you navigate the new game, agnostic of our product. All of our webinars, all of our podcasts, our newsletter, what we post on social is all in service of helping you navigate this new world that we're in. So instead of naming the category, naming the problem, and then just existing to solve that regardless of what you're producing.
I think another nice thing about a really solid point of view is that it's going to kind of scare or push people away who don't believe in it. And that can be seen as a negative by leadership sometimes. But honestly, it's a huge positive, because if they don't believe in what you believe in anyway, it's going to be a really hard sell. And it's going to, like a magnet, draw in the people who are like, yeah, I can get on board with that. I agree. Like that should be the way we're doing this. And so they're going to be even more drawn to your brand and your product and your vision.
I think connecting the points there, what you said, Brendan, is exactly where my head was going. Is a content POV, to me, almost by definition, has to be product agnostic. Because if you're trying to shoehorn your product in, you're doing product marketing. You're not doing helpful, engaging, community building, audience building content. So the content POV needs to be the broader problem that can be solved with or without your product. Like this new report, Mark, like this customer evidence gap, there's a gap. You're identifying the problem, exactly like Brendan said. Your product is a great way to solve that problem. There's also DIY and other things. Like it's not pitching your product inherently by developing that POV, right? We're working with a online training program right now in Spanish language, and they're getting into this whole problem in healthcare about a lack of Spanish language training. They're speaking to the problem and the opportunity. They're not pitching their product. So I think that's number one. And I think number two, it can't be too high level where it's like thought leadership we need sales and marketing to work together. That's our POV. But it also can't be like way in the weeds of saying this is exactly how to do X, Y, Z. It needs to sit somewhere in the middle where you're saying we're identifying a pretty unique problem in this space, and we're dedicated to spending a good amount of time digging into addressing what solving that problem looks like through different themes and topics and levels, from the conceptual down through to the tactical. So it has to be consistent and strong enough to support an entire editorial calendar for at least a couple of quarters, if not a year.
All right, so let's get into that part in a little bit, because I like what you said there, Brooke. So I have a question asking for a friend, aka me. Does product category play into this at all? Is it completely separate from product category? Is there a relationship between the two? You tell me.
To me, the categories, and it's what Brandon said. I think, like you said, just cut those 2 minutes about being product agnostic, and I think you've got it. Like, category is inherently product focused. You're creating a category, and then if you're creating that category, you're going to end up with competitors down the line, right? If you're creating a content POV and you're basing it on your SMEs or your deep partnerships or your platform data, and you're basing it in something that only you can produce, it's not replicable, or at least it's a lot harder to replicate.
I think it also makes it just a forcing function within your company. And I think this is why it's hard for a lot of companies, is because the company was frankly started because people saw an opportunity to make money, or they saw a gap in the market or something like that. And the purpose of their content is basically, hey, do you want to become a lead? And that's a really shitty purpose for content to exist. And I think on like the product category side of things, again, this is something that I've been diving into a lot more lately, is like offer design. So like front end offers that are not like white papers or the traditional stuff. But I think we just always think like the product is our front end offer, like buy the software, and all of this stuff is just to get you to buy the software. But there's other things that you can either give away or sell or do that are interesting and fun. I think even though they're super cringy, I think ClickFunnels does this exceptionally well, where their software is their back end offer. That's why they're, I think, 3 times the size of their nearest competitor, Lead Pages. And it's, again, when you're so focused on your product category, it keeps you in there. And if you're focused on the problem instead, you branch outside of your category. It's like, hey, maybe we should do this. Maybe we should have that. And it's not like we have to keep focused and stay in our lane of our category.
I will say, I think your category should help, another imperative, guide your point of view, right? Like there's a reason that a team of people, some large committee came together and was like, this is the category we're in. And I think it's kind of behind that is like why is this the category? What things are we doing and that's completely different from anyone else that, how are we solving the problem in a unique way? And your point of view will start to be derived from there, right? So like they are connected, but I love kind of, where Brendan and Brooklyn were going, where they don't have to be overt, right? Like it doesn't have to be like, this is the point of view and this, this software is like the way to go about it. It's like, let's just help the people solve the problem. And the point of view, again, is going to help you bring in the people who are going to want to solve the problem in the way that you are solving the problem.
Yeah. Can I ask a question that is tangential, but I think related here? What are your thoughts on top down?
Of course you can. What am I going to say? No?
You could. I'm curious your thoughts on the difference for the both of you of top down versus bottom up for product category versus content POV. Like for me, the category often is top down. It's the CEO saying, yeah, this is the category and this is what we're going after. And often they know because they've been a developer or a salesperson and they know the space. Great. Exactly what you were saying, Jess. To your earlier point about checkbox marketing, Brendan, what we run into often in difficulty on the content POV is that that's still trying to be top down, and we'll do all this work, or the product marketers and the content marketers and the brand marketers will do all this work and listen to customers and go out and talk to people and then come back and say, okay, here's what is hitting and here's the questions that they're asking and here's the pain points they're facing and here's the themes and topics we need to dig into because of that. And here's how it flows up to an overarching narrative. And then you'll get edits or pushback or all kinds of red tape once you start surfacing that to the leadership. So I'm curious your thoughts on like the balance of top down versus bottom up for content POV.
I'll get started from past experience. I don't even think my last CEO or my current CEO knows what a content POV is, but when they see a good content POV, they say, yes, more of that. I want that. Whereas the category usually is from the top down.
I would agree. It's hard because you become a forcing function, especially if you're an outsider coming in. You are, or even when you're inside a company. Like, can you imagine I was an individual contributor on purpose at ActiveCampaign because I couldn't deal with managing people anymore. I can barely manage.
You also taught kids for so long that I feel like you were kind of over that.
Yeah, I did teach high school for 10 years. I'm on that. And I'm the principal for a little bit. We're all good here. I don't have employees. But do you imagine an individual contributor talking all the way up, even in a small org, this is a problem because the founders or CEOs are really close to everything and everything is still theirs. In a huge organization, this is also a problem. It's kind of that like reverse bell curve, right? It's also a problem because they're too far away. But you have this individual contributor going, hey, I think we need to rethink everything because we've pulled our customers, instead of us being across the table from our customers, we pulled their chair onto the same side of the table as us. And sometimes the organization maybe isn't ready to hear that because that's not what they think. And I think the thing with marketing that we learn really quickly is like you put it out into the world and it's not yours anymore, right? Your customers, your audience do with it what they want. They interpret it how they want. And they have their own thoughts about what your product is solving for them, what your company is solving for them in terms of the problem. And I think that's where it comes from is like listening, but it's hard, Brooklyn, to your point of like surfacing that stuff up. And if you have levels of bureaucracy or you have people that are really owning their swim lanes of like, that's not how we talk about that because I'm the product marketer and this is how we talk about it, you kind of just have to err of like, cool, I'm just like, this is just what they said.
Yeah.
It's just what our best customer.
I'm the messenger. Yeah.
Yeah. Like
I'm just translating.
Cool. I disagree with our customers. Cool. But
yeah.
I was just going to say, I've had projects that I was like, I had so much heart behind because I had that validation from customers or advisors that like, yes, this is a problem we're thinking about. This is, something we're investing in. And it didn't align with what leadership felt was our point of view, even though our customers are saying yes. Right. And sometimes, man, that's painful, but it's like, you just kind of have to take that hit every once in a while. But like, I like to keep those on the back burner because it's like, I don't know, they might hear something, you know how leadership is, like they might hear something on a podcast on Tuesday and be like, hey, remember that idea you had? Let's resurrect that. Right. So it's like, sometimes you just need those outside forces to come in and like hit them and it's resurrected in an odd way.
I remember I had an executive one time tell me that like, if we wanted to, like, they thought that thought leadership and leading meant they had to decide, and we shouldn't. And this is true in a lot of cases. Like, you shouldn't listen to customers. Like, they might be incorrect, or you might build the thing that they say they want, and then there's all sorts that's just wrought with issues. But I think, I got quoted by an executive, the Ford quote of like, if I would have listened to people, to customers, I would have built a faster horse. I kind of replied, well, cool. He was also the 8th car. Like, they knew the way the market was going. They saw proof. There were 8 car companies before his. Like, it's not that he invented, despite the revisionist history, right? Of like, they invented this thing. They didn't. And there is, despite that quote being used a lot of times, like, you do have to look at the market, look at your audience, and listen to customers in a lot of ways. And even if you're going to disagree with them, having a well thought out reason why versus just it's my opinion against theirs, that can be problematic.
So is that the best place to get started then when you're building out a content POV?
With customers?
Like, where would you get started?
Wink, wink. Is listening to your customers the best place to start? Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's up 110%. And here's the thing, like, but people are
obvious,
also,
oftentimes people don't think that way. So,
or they don't have, I empathize terribly. Like when being outside in agencies and even being in-house, like sometimes it's hard to find customers and talk to them. And it's like, well, we have customer marketing and we don't want to email them that much. And we already bother them enough. Or, we have a technical audience and they don't like that sort of thing. Or, so, there's all sorts of reasons why this becomes hard to do. And I empathize with that deeply. So it's easy for me to post on LinkedIn, talk to customers, but I also understand internally how challenging that. I have a 20,000 person email list and I send out a thing that's like, will you take this survey? And I get like 17 people to fill it out of 20,000. Like, that's very real when that stuff, like, it's very hard to get this stuff sometimes.
I think a shortcut, it's not even a shortcut, but yes, it can be really difficult to actually get time with your customers or implement something. Well, I won't name drop, but the right tools to get those insights you need and organized. But this, like, if you're an individual contributor or a new manager or a new director of content, even this sounds trite, but almost nobody I talk to on sales calls or new clients are doing it. And we're coming in and saying, okay, let's do this thing. It's talk to your customer success team, talk to your sales team, talk to your product managers, because guess what? All of them are listening to your customers, or should be, with product managers building out roadmaps, customer success, hearing the questions that are coming up, and sales presenting every pain point, hearing every objection, getting every question. Like, there's got to be a way to bring all that together internally. I think it sounds really negative. I can say it because I'm a content marketer, but I feel like content marketers often resort to, oh, woe is me. We don't have a seat at the table. We don't have the right tools. We never get budget. We don't have access to our customers. Like, just start with the small steps that you can start with. And that starts by taking time with your product managers and your CSMs and your AEs. Like, you don't have to start with your CEO and say, what's our POV? What are we going to market with? Like, just start with your counterparts and go to market, and then use that to document and build from there.
I love that. To wrap it in a bow, I called it. I end up coining all these phrases just to help communicate to like executive leadership and give them like same as like naming your problem, creating content IP for your customers. You also have to do that internally so that they can wrap their head around things. So I've called it like the 3S strategy, like sales, success, and support. You talk to them, build those like virtuous cycles. Copy AI has a really cool thing where they'll take like gong call, and you could probably do this with a number of tools, right? But like you can take your gong call recordings, it'll summarize all of that, parts of the product they care about, problem statements, all these like beautiful summaries, pipe that right into Slack. And now you have a Slack channel that shows every single disco call that goes on and what happens. You don't have to listen to an hour-long gong call anymore. Now all of a sudden you have a feed of that and the whole company can see what's happening on sales calls and what they care about and what their problems are. There's really cool ways and creative ways. I think if we're talking about uses of generative AI, like that's a really good use of it, not to write your blogs. I think we're all maybe against that, but like there's cool ways to get around these things. There's really clever solutions out there and some that, you know, to Brooklyn's point, like don't involve technology. It's just reaching out and connecting with people.
I don't think any MarTech tool could replace a good Google Sheet. Honestly,
you said that with such a straight face.
Brooklyn, have you tweeted that yet?
Probably. I don't remember.
So, Jess, I was going to say, I feel like you just started at Island, but turns out you haven't. You've been there about a year.
Yeah.
So did you inherit a content POV, or I guess walk me through what took place and how you built that out? Because I really love what I've been seeing from you all.
Thank you. I kind of had this crazy, bout of luck where they hired me, even though a content marketer was not on their roadmap. My manager and I had worked together at a previous company. She found out that I was potentially looking for my next thing. And so she was like, let's just figure this out. So I was lucky enough in that I made it over there, and that there wasn't really that we had great messaging. We had a great story, but I don't know that a point of view had really been fleshed out, or at least not documented. It was kind of there floating around in, leadership interviews and within the messaging documents, but it wasn't like actually written down somewhere, like, this is what we think about this topic. This is what we think about this problem. And so that was actually one of my first kind of tasks, is like, okay, what are the things we actually have points of view on that we can own, that we have credibility and can build trust against? And then what are those points of view? And so kind of getting those down in a deck and socializing that with the right people, making sure that we're using the exact right words, because words really matter in those things. So yeah, that was one of kind of my first tasks, and what an exciting first task.
You make it sound really easy. Was it as easy as you just described it?
No, I think there was a lot of back and forth. I think when it feels easy and fun when you're the one like writing things down and you're like, this sounds great, and I think this is right. And then the real work comes when you start to socialize it, right? So you're getting it in front of people and everyone has a very strong opinion on like, that word is not right, or we shouldn't be talking about that at all, or like, instead of that, we should say this, right? And so that's where like the real, I don't know, kind of political work comes in, where you're like trying to figure out, okay, whose opinion.
I know what you're not saying. The fun part, the not so fun part. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. That's the challenge, is like, whose opinion, all of these opinions matter, but like, which ones are actually going to make it into this thing, right? Because some are conflicting, and it's really difficult to weigh all of that and figure out what's going to make it into the final cut.
Did you learn something in that you would do differently moving forward? Because that is a very common problem. Like this week, a sales call, he's like, our problem is we're creating content for an internal audience, and we're creating by committee. So it's blah, and it's not what our actual audience wants. It's for our internal leadership audience. So like when you have 15 stakeholders, how did you narrow in on what matters?
Yeah,
most?
That's such a great question. One thing I wish I would have done, that I have since done, but I wish I would have done like earlier, is again, run those points of view past some customers, past some like people on our advisory board, and get their take on it. Like, does this pass muster for you? Is this just like marketing BS? Would this be interesting to you if like we had a series of content that basically supported this point of view? And get their thoughts on it, because one validates for me that like I'm on the right track before I take it to leadership. And two, it arms me with that validation to be like, hey, CMO, chief customer officer, CEO, whatever, like these customers, X, Y, and Z have said like, this is resonating for them. Right. So that's absolutely something I wish I would have done. And it's hard when it's like one of your first tasks in a company, because you're still trying to figure out who's really understanding marketing and what I'm trying to do here versus what their role is or what their very big opinionated feelings are about the company, especially if they've been there a while, if they're the founder, right? So yeah, I don't know if that's something I could have necessarily like figured out how to do differently, but just I think probably seeking some guidance on like, okay, someone who's been here longer, like who's really like the person that, hey, if they say it, listen. I think that's always helpful to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, like figuring out
that.
who actually knows. Like I remember when I was a teacher, it's such a weird analogy, but when you're a teacher, you realize really quickly that like the secretarial staff and the custodians are actually the ones who run the school.
Yeah.
And if they are your best friends, they matter more than anybody else in the entire building. And I think figuring that out within your company, like,
yeah,
hey, I'm going to come in strong. I take an ownership mindset. If you're a quick start kind of person like I am, where I come in really hot and want to do stuff really fast, set that up in your interview, but then also like figure out like who really has the keys around here.
Totally.
What's the funniest janitor's school story that you can remember, Brendan?
Oh, man.
And if you can't think of one now, we'll close the episode out. So I'll give you more time to think, but I'm not going to let you off the hook like that.
Okay. You want me to tell you something right now?
Do you have something good or do you want me to wait?
Oh, I don't know. I think like the funniest thing is that some people would be surprised about this. Most people that have worked with me, not surprised. I am very like disorganized. I have to learn to be an organized person and time block stuff, but I'm inherently very, like, if you could see my desk right now, it's an absolute nightmare. But so as a teacher, I was very similar, and I can't, like, the custodians were my best allies because not only would they help me break up fights, which like became like my de facto job. They're like, you're a large dude, you break up the fights. But like they would also help me, like when you become really good friends, it's like, hey, can you like run and get this for me? Can you help me with this? Like over time, I'll give you an example. Over time, I accumulated a lot of cool stuff in my room because there was cool stuff in the building, whether that's like extra closets or really cool desks or like a neat table. Like I could just get anything I wanted over time because I would just ask, and they were like, absolutely. If I needed more supplies, like it would just be in my room. Like stuff like that just happened, and you don't realize like how much of a struggle it is unless you have those relationships internally, you know?
So who's doing this right at the moment? Who has like a really good content POV as a brand?
Actually, Brendan mentioned one for me. Oh,
This was not planted. And funny story, that's actually the old copy because Brendan gave me feedback and we changed the name of the report and what we're calling the problem. So that was not a planted pat me on the back question.
That's hilarious.
Nice. Who's doing it well? Should you start with customers when you're developing a content POV type of question?
I was going to say, Brendan brought one up for me, Copy AI. Brendan and I, and Mark, I don't know if you saw it, but Cal Coleman, who's their CMO, had a really great presentation at Drive. And he talked about that. Like he talked about how they named the problem GTM bloat, right? Like he actually had this great slide where it was like 4 kind of Gen AI tools. And it was like, write your content faster was like the thing. And it's like, well, no, that's not actually like the good thing about Gen AI. And so, he talked about how they took a lot of time to like really think. Actually, I think he said it was part of his interview process. Like he took it upon himself to basically reposition them and came up with the idea of GTM bloat as like the problem they were solving. We're spending all this money on agencies and, like coming up with ideas and figuring all this stuff out. And like some of that is necessary, but a lot of it can be done, with like automation and really understanding like how you're taking all of that input. Like we talked about the sales calls and, the leadership interviews and things like that, and how you're actually directing that information in a way where you can use it very quickly and not have to spend so much time and cost on it, right? And so I thought that was a really, really interesting one, that he like just did that of his own accord to like get the job, and like obviously got it.
That doesn't surprise me. That
No,
guy
I
is
know.
a
Yeah.
machine.
Yeah. But that he took a completely different approach. It's not speed, right? It's not, get the thing done faster. It's like cut out all of the waste and use what you already have at your disposal to make more great stuff.
So this is two things on that, Jess. I think that's a great example. It's actually one that I hadn't thought of, despite like having that thought during that time. I even had somebody come up afterwards and was like, "Oh, that's the content IP thing, right? Like that's naming the problem." And that was cool because I don't know him personally, and like it's cool when you see other really smart people arriving at the same conclusions as you independently. The thing, I mean, it's very validating.
It is. It's helpful.
Another smart person, you're like, I think that way too. That's neat. But it really pissed me off though, because he, afterwards they opened up for Q&A and everybody's asking him about like, how do you choose your category and what category? What if your old category was a better category? And he's like, very plain, like, you notice I didn't tell you what category we think we're in. I didn't talk about it at all, and that's for a reason. Like the problem we solve is way more important. I think a bunch of people do this well. I think I don't know how you say his name, Mark Casaglow from Operator AI. Yeah.
That's the example I was going to point to. It's perfect.
Do it.
All right, you talk about this because I have some thoughts on it. Keep going.
Oh, I mean, his current thing with Operator, but like at each company, because I was at Outreach with him, and he was always super crystal clear about our positioning, what problem we're solving, and not getting lost in the noise. And then he brought that to Catalyst, and then now he's launching Operator. And each time there's a very clear POV that is going back to what we talked about at the beginning. It's based on the problem, right? All the way through to Operator. So yeah, I've liked all three iterations of that. Outreach had the bloat, but Catalyst and now Operator.
He calls it the great ignore. And I was like, that's so smart. The whole homepage, if you go to operator.ai right now, depending on when you listen to this or watch this, like the whole homepage is a manifesto. And I think that's super interesting, like really tripling down on that. I never knew where this came from, this way of thinking about naming these things. And my friend Kurt Woodward, who is an incredible content marketer at ZoomInfo, was like, he has a journalism background. And he explained to me that these are actually called, in journalism, these are called conceptual scoops. I had never heard that phrase before, but he was very plain, like, you know what a conceptual scoop is, right? Like we all saw the Great Resignation and quiet quitting. It's simply when there's an overarching trend that we can all define long form, and then you give a name to it, and then everybody, what you want, and I think, Jess, you kind of alluded to this too, is like you want that thing of like, it's like a snap and point of like, oh yeah, that's like, you want that kind of reaction, right? You want the eyebrow raised when you explain it to people because they felt that problem viscerally for so long, and now they have words for it. So I think even like calling it the great ignore, we've known this problem long form for a while, right? But now we have a phrase for it. And I don't know if I love that word, but I love like good copy and clever stuff like this. So I think things like that are great. I do think you can get off the rails a little bit. So I've seen people name problems really, really well. I think Chris Walker named Dark Social and the Attribution Mirage really, really well. Problem was it was a little too disconnected from what they offered, which is we will run your Facebook ads for you at the time. And they kind of tried to like brand. That's not a dig, but like people were like,
no, I heard the same thing. Somebody else was like, well, this is a great way of talking about it, but it's a performance marketing agency.
Right. But now he does more of that, right? He does his own consulting, and it's very much about solving the attribution mirage. And I think that's the right way to do it. But you have to be careful when you're naming problems that you don't exist to solve.
Yeah. Ooh, that's the soundbite right there. That's good.
What does it look like? So these are early stage companies. I also think of Demio. I'm forgetting her name right now, who just launched it. It came to market similar to Operator.ai, where it's like, here's our manifesto. And they started with content. Like week 2, they were running live sessions as like head-to-head demos essentially, and started out with content. What I'm trying to think through more of what this looks like with much more established companies with very large product suites and 10 different ICPs. Like Yeah, it's a different question, I guess. So the one example I think of there is Coursera, because they have their B2C and they have their B2B. And on the B2B side, the strong POV is investing in learning and development now will have business impact short term, midterm, and long term in terms of growth potential, churn, hiring costs, all of this. And like all the content that they put out through their B2B end of things focuses on that content POV. It's just from half a dozen different angles. I'm curious for other larger companies like that, if you've seen a successful content POV.
I think it's hard, and I think that's why this ends up becoming like a, not an incumbent game. I do think it's the biggest opportunity for incumbents, but it's really hard with all of the, it's literally, Brooklyn, this is a great point. It's everything we talked about today. There's too many stakeholders. There's too much of this like bureaucracy. There's too many customers, too many products. Like it becomes really, really hard to narrow down a consistent POV once the ship, we built such a big ship, like it's hard to narrow it down. I think when the opportunity early on is to really own the problem, and the incumbents, ideally, like people have asked me about that. Like, what if they steal our language? What if they talk about the problem the same way? Great. Like, that's actually what we want. I want them using and popularizing the thing that I came up with.
We've had the same conversation, even for our tiny little 5-person company. And we're seeing that. And I'm like, I'll take it. I think it's a good thing. It means we're accomplishing what we're talking about, where it's not about the solution or product. It's about, let's talk about this problem and how we can solve it.
I will say, like, you just brought something up for me, Brooklyn, where you're talking about Coursera, where, like, if their point of view is this idea that this training, right, it has impact in all of these different stages, and then they go and they live that, like, they're creating content that allows you to have those kind of breakthrough moments, short term, midterm, long term, right? Like, actually, I guess, like, dog fooding your content POV as much as you do your actual product feels just as important for any size of company, right? That you are actually living the things you're saying everyone else should be doing, right?
Yeah, they just launched 3 different tracks for Gen AI training, and they had gone through it internally as a company first. So a lot of the content they put out is, here's what it looked like for us to roll out Gen AI training for everyone, for teams, and for executives. And it just, content POV is not a topic. It's your perspective, and should, if your POV does not open up more ideas than you know what to do with and have the bandwidth to produce, then it probably needs work, because it should just open up this whole, we can talk about this and we can explore it from this angle and we can get tactical here. We can talk to Kyle Lacey about the conceptual end of things and leadership. Like, it should open up a whole world of content possibilities.
We're clipping that. So that was perfect. So one question that I want to end with, mostly because I know that with this group, we probably could talk for like another hour. This is super interesting. Once you have the content POV and you've gone through all the legwork, now what? Like, how do you actually use it? How are you making sure that it doesn't just sit in a Google slide presentation and collect dust on the cloud? Like, what are you doing, Jess, with it on an ongoing basis?
So I think a lot of what our points of view are doing for us at Island is they're generating, like Brooklyn just talked about, like all these ideas and stories, right? Like, hey, this market trend is kind of popping up and we have a point of view on that matter, right? And so let's just take that story and let's push it in all the ways we can, right? So we're bringing the teams together. We're bringing, growth and comms and events together. And we're like, events, this is kind of, here's like the abstract and title for that. How do we feel like that? Could that be a presentation? Growth team, could this be some sort of campaign? And we have a really great landing page about, our point of view on this problem, and can we get some, ad creative together? Comms team, can we pitch some stories to press about, this kind of differentiated point of view and like how it's not been done before? And then content, can we, create some sort of blog post or social commentary around this thing, right? So we're not just taking a piece of content, putting our point of view into it, and then like repurposing that. We're taking the story at large and bringing in all of the different kind of specialists and seeing how we can disseminate that story. And I feel like there's pretty marked difference there.
I love the way you talk through that, Jess, because I think what we see all the time is there's a bunch of different visual ways of showing it, but like, oh, here's your tentpole piece, and then it breaks up into blogs, and then there's podcasts, and then there's social posts, and it's this whole tree, right? For distribution, but those are the assets. I think what I was hearing in what you're saying is it's not just the actual assets or deliverables or channels they're living on. It's, okay, we have this overarching POV. What are the themes that can serve as the pillars to that POV? And then what are the topics under each of those themes that we can dig into? And at which level? Like, what's conceptual, a traditional thought leadership? What's strategic, where we're talking to directors and DPs about like a question Mark just asked, how do you actually do this thing? Or is it tactical? Is it a step-by-step guide for an individual contributor who's just looking to get shit done and doesn't have the internal support that they need? And they get that, maybe in 9 months, they become a champion for you. Like, it's breaking it down into as many different parts and angles as possible.
Yeah. Less about the format and way more about the story, which I love.
Yeah, I think we're talking about like premise, right? Where it's differentiated. And I love the phrasing of like, unlike other podcasts on this topic, that has to be your point of differentiation. Unlike other newsletters that talk about X, only we Y, right? If you can answer that sentence and it resonates internally, it resonates with all the different teams that we've talked about, it resonates with customers, you can use that premise across everything.
And make sure you have the substance to back it up. I mean that product-wise, and I mean that data-wise and team-wise, not to denigrate. It's far enough ago, I think it's okay. Basecamp had a very strong POV and then imploded because they didn't have the actual meat of what they were talking about internally. So like, make sure you have what you need to back up what you're promising in your point of view and what you're going to market with.
The culture of differentiation.
It's okay, I just bashed Basecamp.
No, screw them.
You're fine.
No, screw them.
I don't really argue that.
It has to come from the top. I'll say this like as a final thing. Like the culture of differentiated marketing has to come from the top. It is very hard to go bottom up with it, to our earlier points. Not everything has to be differentiated. You could have a super differentiated and unique premise around a podcast, and then that feeds into everything else, or a live event series, and that feeds into everything else. Like, there are these like feeder channels or feeder media, we can call it, that feed into everything else. But in order to do that, you have to kind of, I think, sometimes be okay with leadership, especially when you're in-house. Ask them, like, do you care more about output or impact? And I think they'll always say impact. And you're like, cool, if I produce half as many, whatever box checking we've been doing, if I do half as many, for how long are you okay with that? A week, a month, a quarter, a year? Like, figuring that out, because this takes time. This is a thing that marketers are usually not afforded, especially in B2B and especially in tech. We just don't have time to sit and think. And you're like, I'm going to block out a half day to just think about this. That is really, really valuable, but it is also very rare.
I had a blast. I learned a ton on this. There's one last question, and not to exclude you, Jess, or exclude you, Brooklyn, but it doesn't apply to you. Brendan, is there any syrup left?
Are you asking me if I drink all the syrup?
Is when I thought that Brendan
wasn't Drive like a week ago.
When he was going to strike out at the gift shop, I was like, here's my bottle of syrup from the Exit 5 gift bag to hopefully give you a backup plan.
Yeah, man, it's still there. We haven't used it yet. I've been able to not go on a syrup binge. Thanks.
You're not just smashing.
I'd be worried if it was gone already.
What kind of a madman do you think I am?
It's amazing.
It's on his desk, though.
I really did wish it was here. That would have been.
Well, all right. Last thing. I promise. Last thing. Jess and Brendan, did you have any of the Vermont coffee with like the syrup in it?
No. Didn't even know that was a possibility.
It was a thing until I was in Vermont for the first time at Drive.
That means I have to go next year. Check it out.
Yeah. Well, I still have so I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, all this is confirming I got to go next year.
Yes.
I'm the odd man out here.
Next year.
You must go next year. Point of view.
Must.
I was quiet because you three taught me a ton on this topic. This was a blast. We'll have to maybe record one in the future when we see how my little content POV that I'm working on at UserEvidence lands like 6 months from now. But appreciate you guys for coming on the Proof Point.
So fun. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.